When the Pacific War erupted, the Japanese Navy's Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter immediately asserted absolute terrifying dominance over the skies, forcing Allied pilots into a desperate, losing fight. Lighter, faster, and built for extreme agility, the Zero was an engineering marvel that could outclimb, outturn, and outrun every Allied fighter deployed against it in the early stages of the conflict, particularly the American F-4F Wildcat. The Zero combined incredible maneuverability with an astonishing combat radius, allowing it to strike deep and engage for prolonged periods. The sight of its distinct silhouette became synonymous with imminent death for American pilots. For the commanders of the nascent U.S. Navy and Marine Air Wings, the Zero was not just a superior aircraft. It was an existential threat, capable of delivering crushing losses that threatened to neutralize the entire Pacific Fleet's air defense capability before it could even organize. This technical superiority created a profound psychological and tactical crisis. The Allies simply had no answer for the Zero's deadly grace. The inherent advantages of the Zero translated directly into a pilot's nightmare every time a Japanese squadron appeared. Pilots flying the sturdier, heavier American F-4F Wildcat were instantly at a disadvantage. The Wildcat was slower to accelerate, had a poorer climb rate, and, most critically, possessed a turning radius so wide that engaging the Zero in a conventional dogfight was deemed suicide. A Zero pilot needed only a few seconds to slip inside the Wildcat's turn, gain the vital positional advantage, and deliver the fatal blow. The only viable tactic commanders could enforce was the hit-and-run boom and zoom, using the Wildcat's superior diving speed and toughness to escape, but this strategy meant they could rarely protect each other, and certainly couldn't protect the fleet. The air was a relentless shooting gallery, and for every American pilot, the fight wasn't about victory. It was about surviving long enough to escape the Zero's deadly, circular embrace. The crushing loss rates necessitated a completely new way to fight, one that ignored the traditional rules of one-on-one combat. The catastrophic truth was starkly reflected in the early kill ratios. American pilots were being systematically annihilated because they were attempting to fight the Zero on its own terms. Every conventional dogfight ended in predictable and fatal disaster. The Zero, built to be lightweight at the expense of pilot armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, was a glass cannon, but its agility ensured that Allied pilots rarely got a clean shot. American formations broke down instantly under attack. Pilots would instinctively break away to the left or right, leaving their wingmen exposed. The Zero pilot would exploit this separation, effortlessly positioning himself directly on the 6 o'clock, the vulnerable rear, of the isolated American fighter. The current tactics fostered isolation, and in the chaos of battle, isolation meant death. The Navy realized that individual skill and traditional training were insufficient. They needed a systematic defensive maneuver that would transform their fighters from vulnerable targets into an interlocking, mutually supportive kill zone, eliminating the Zero's singular greatest advantage: its ability to chase and destroy an isolated plane. The immense pressure to find a solution fell upon men like Lieutenant Commander John S. Jimmy Thach, an air group commander with the VF-3 fighter squadron. Thach was not just a skilled pilot. He was an obsessive tactical thinker who recognized that the problem was not the American airplane, but the American doctrine. He understood that merely flying faster or turning harder would never beat the piece Zero. Thach spent countless hours poring over combat reports, listening to the desperate pleas of surviving pilots, and trying to visualize a system that could turn the Wildcat's perceived weakness, its slow turning speed, into an advantage. He faced a dual challenge. First, devising a geometric solution that guaranteed protection. And second, selling that highly unconventional idea to a skeptical naval command structure accustomed to decades of rigid aerial combat procedures. The survival of his squadron, and arguably the ability of the Navy to project power in the Pacific, rested entirely on his ability to find a mathematical and geometrical flaw in the Zero's seemingly perfect superiority. Commander Thach's frustration stemmed directly from the technological constraints imposed by the F-4F Wildcat, a machine that, while rugged and reliable, was a definite second best against the Zero. The Wildcat's weakness was not its armor or its firepower, but its raw performance profile. It was significantly heavier, had a slower climb rate, and most critically, possessed a wide, lazy turning radius compared to the Zero's almost instantaneous maneuverability. Attempting to match the Zero in a horizontal turn was a guaranteed path to death. Thach and his pilots were effectively flying a flying tank against a razor blade. The Wildcat could absorb tremendous damage, but only if the pilots survived the initial attack. Thach knew his planes were designed for a different kind of fight, built for durability and deck landings, not the agile ballet of Japanese dogfighting. He realized the only path to victory was to stop relying on the plane's individual ability and create a system of mutual support that turned the Wildcat's heavy structure into a decisive, concentrated firing platform. The solution had to be tactical, not technological, a way to negate the Zero's speed without upgrading the engine. The breakthrough that had eluded the Navy's top engineers and tacticians finally came not in a flight simulator or a war room, but in the oppressive heat of Thach's ready room, fueled by intense frustration. One evening, after yet another squadron briefing filled with grim losses, Thach was staring at his desk. He grabbed a handful of matchsticks and pencils, simple, rigid objects, and began moving them across his chart table. The matches represented his fighters, and the pencil represented the attacking Zero. He was trying to visualize a way for a defender to turn away from an attacker while simultaneously moving toward his wingman. The epiphany struck when he realized that traditional fighter doctrine forced both planes to move in the same direction, creating the predictable separation the Zero exploited. Thach rearranged the matches into two pairs, flying parallel, and then moved them to simulate the aggressive action of the Zero. As the attacker closed on the lead fighter, Thach moved the pair into a crossing or scissoring pattern. The simple action demonstrated that by turning inward toward each other, the two planes could fly across each other's path, ensuring that the Zero, locked onto one target, would fly directly into the firing arc of the other plane. This simple, low-tech visualization was the matchstick moment that cracked the Zero's tactical code. Thach quickly translated his matchstick geometry into a formal maneuver he dubbed the beam defense position, though it is eternally known now as the Thach Weave. The concept was revolutionary in its present simplicity. Instead of flying in standard staggered formations, fighters would fly in tight pairs, separated by about 200 feet. When an enemy Zero attacked the leader of the pair from the rear, the two pilots would instantly turn sharply inward toward each other, cutting across each other's flight paths. The pilot who was being attacked would intentionally fly his wingman directly into the path of the attacking Zero. This scissoring maneuver served two vital purposes. First, it presented the attacking Zero with a rapidly changing target, disrupting its attack run. And second, it guaranteed that the Zero, committed to the attack on the first aircraft, would suddenly find itself flying directly into the concentrated, simultaneous crossfire of the second aircraft, becoming the target itself. The tactic transformed the Zero's advantage in speed and maneuverability into a fatal liability. Despite the elegance of the geometrical proof, the Thach Weave was met with immediate, significant initial skepticism from senior commanders and many pilots alike. The core idea, turning toward your attacker and flying across the path of your wingman, violated nearly every established rule of air combat safety and formation integrity that had been drilled into pilots for years. Historically, flying parallel and maintaining space was paramount. Crossing paths seemed like a recipe for mid-air collision, especially during the extreme stress and disorientation of combat. Furthermore, the tactic required an unprecedented level of mutual trust and disciplined flying between wingmen, something that was difficult to guarantee in the chaos of a full-scale dogfight. Critics argued that the required communication and coordination would be too complex under fire, and the initial training sessions were difficult, with pilots struggling to overcome their instinct to turn away from the threat. Thach faced the daunting challenge of convincing hardened, traditional pilots that the most dangerous move turning inward was, in fact, the only thing that could save their lives. The theoretical geometry proven by Matchsticks was soon validated by a crucible of fire that irrevocably changed the war in the Pacific. The moment of truth arrived during the desperate fighting at the Battle of Midway, and later, during the grinding campaign for Guadalcanal. When Japanese Zeros, confident in their absolute superiority, closed in on American formations executing the newly trained Thach Weave, the results were immediate and catastrophic for the enemy. The Zero pilots, relying on their predictable high-speed approach to attack an isolated target from the vulnerable 6 o'clock position, suddenly found themselves flying directly into a terrifying, concentrated wall of defensive fire from the crossing wingman. Dramatic image of two F-4F Wildcats scissoring as a Zero flies into their combined crossfire, visibly taking hits. The maneuver instantly negated the Zero's massive maneuverability advantage. The speed that had made it dominant now simply propelled it into a high-speed, fatal ambush. The success was undeniable and immediate. Kill ratios, which had previously favored the Japanese by devastating margins, began to equalize and soon tipped in favor of the American pilots. The Thach Weave transformed the F-4F Wildcat from a slow, vulnerable target into an interlocking, mutually supporting death trap. It wasn't just a tactic, it was a psychological weapon. It robbed the Zero pilot of the predictability he relied upon and introduced chaos and lethal risk into every approach. Commander Thach's low-tech genius solution, born from desperation and visualized with common matchsticks, did more than just save the lives of individual pilots. It provided the U.S.S. Navy with the crucial tactical stability needed during the darkest hours of the early Pacific campaign. This simple, revolutionary defensive maneuver ended the unchallenged reign of the Zero and was the single greatest factor allowing American forces to hold the line, ultimately paving the way for the eventual technological and strategic victory in the Pacific skies.